145 miles per hour, 375 horsepower, a 392 cubic inch Hemi breathing inside a slab of Detroit steel long enough to make modern parking sensors beg for therapy. That was not a stripped-down race toy, not a European featherweight, and not some delicate little machine that needed perfect weather and a mechanic named Nigel. It was gasoline, compression, chrome, and a speedometer being dragged into dangerous territory. This is a speed ranking. 10 American cars from the 1950s climbing from about 125 miles per hour to the machine that sits on the Hemi throne. After this, the 1950s will not look like a polite museum decade. It will look like the first crime scene of American horsepower. The 1957 Pontiac Bonneville fuel injection arrived dressed like money. Long body, low stance, Starflight-style side trim, and enough chrome to make it look expensive before the starter ever coughed awake. But that badge was not jewelry. Fuel injection was the warning label. Pontiac paired a 347 cubic inch V8 with a Rochester fuel injection system and pulled 310 horsepower out of it. In 1957, that was serious fuel delivery, expensive hardware, a cleaner, sharper way to feed a V8 while the rest of the car tried to act respectable. At about 125 miles per hour, the Bonneville's luxury act starts coming apart at the seams. The windshield takes the air straight in the face, the long body has to stay straight while the road gets mean, and all that chrome stops being decoration. It becomes weight. Old Pontiac weight, riding behind an engine that is done pretending this is just a convertible for rich men with nice shoes. This was not full muscle car violence yet. It was colder than that. A luxury Pontiac using technology to sharpen its teeth while still smiling through chrome. The 1956 Studebaker Golden Hawk looked like it already knew people were going to talk trash. Fastback roofline, trimmed rear, sharp tail fins, and proportions that seemed drawn by someone who got tired of Detroit's usual chrome parade. Studebaker did not have endless money, a giant war chest, or a corporate sledgehammer sitting in the back room. So the Golden Hawk used the oldest trick in the garage: find a bigger engine, stuff it into a smaller body, and make the fancy cars explain themselves later. The power came from a 352 cubic inch Packard 5.8, making 275 horsepower. That number does not bully the rest of this ranking by itself, but the Golden Hawk had a lighter, more compact body than the big Detroit barges, less dead weight, less sheet metal to shove, better leverage for every horsepower it had. Top speed reached 125 miles per hour. That is where the badge stopped mattering. A Studebaker might not scare anybody sitting still, but once the road opened up, the Golden Hawk could make bigger, richer machines look confused in the left lane. Big borrowed V8, smaller shell, no apology. Detroit loved size. Studebaker found the loophole and drove straight through it. A heavy family sedan trying to hold 130 miles per hour is not a relaxing experience. It is momentum with upholstery. The 1959 Chevrolet Impala 348 tri-power looked like America on a Friday night. Wide, low, shiny, and built with enough confidence to take up space without asking. Big cabin, big trunk, long chrome lines. A family sedan on the surface, but the hardware had other plans. The 348 cubic inch W Series V8 changed the mood fast. With tri-power feeding it, output climbed up to 315 horsepower. More air, more fuel, more shove. Suddenly, this was not just a full-size Chevy for hauling groceries and relatives. This was a big steel body with too much speed in its mouth. Top speed landed between 125 and 130 miles per hour. At that pace, the Impala is a lot of Chevy to haul back down. Pedal bite becomes precious. Brake load stacks up fast. The front end gets heavy, the body starts to float, and tire squirm shows up every time the driver feeds another correction into the wheel. This is still a family sedan, and physics does not care how clean the chrome looks. The 348W series also pointed toward Chevy's later big block thinking. Mainstream America had discovered something dangerous. A family car did not need racing stripes to make the highway sweat. The 1957 Chevrolet Corvette fuel injection was the moment the pretty fiberglass dream finally grew teeth. Earlier, Corvette logic had an uncomfortable flaw. The shape looked fast before the engine could fully back it up. 2 seats, lightweight fiberglass, American sports car theater. But the early pulse was not strong enough to make the car truly dangerous beside serious European machinery. Chevrolet fixed the insult with a 283 cubic inch V8, Rochester ramjet fuel injection, and 283 horsepower, 1 horsepower per cubic inch. That number was not just clean. It was the kind of number car guys remember because it sounds like somebody in engineering slammed a wrench on the desk and said, "There. Happy now?" Top speed reached 132 miles per hour. In a big sedan, speed feels like mass punching through the air. In this Corvette, it feels sharper. Less body to haul, less weight to shove around, less old metal nonsense between the driver and the engine. The V8 wasn't dragging a living room down the highway. It was pulling a compact roadster wrapped in fiberglass and bad intentions. At 132 miles per hour, that fiberglass shell stops feeling like styling material. It becomes the thin skin between the driver, the engine, and a wall of angry American air. The Corvette was not the fastest car here, but it stopped being a beautiful idea and started acting like a threat. The 1957 Ford Thunderbird F-Code wore manners like a disguise. Low roofline, removable hardtop, that famous porthole window. The whole machine carried personal luxury confidence from nose to tail. It looked like a car owned by a man who knew where the good steakhouse was. The problem was boost. A McCulloch-Paxton supercharger fed a 312 cubic inch V8 and pushed output to 300 horsepower. In 1957, a factory supercharged personal luxury car was not normal behavior. It was Detroit smiling politely while hiding brass knuckles in the glove box. The F-Code could exceed 132 miles per hour. At that speed, the calm exterior starts lying through its teeth. The supercharger rams air into the intake charge. The V8 pulls harder than the body language suggests, and the drivetrain has to swallow boost-fed torque from a car that still looks like it belongs outside a country club. This was not some loud street rat with primer paint and a bad attitude. It was worse. It made forced induction look respectable. That is why collectors still chase the F-Code. It is rare, strange, and deeply American in the most suspicious way. Ford made boost look civilized. Barely. The 1956 DeSoto Adventurer did not sneak into traffic. It arrived like it expected the curb to salute. Virgil Exner's forward look gave it a long, low body, heavy chrome presence, and high-contrast paint schemes like gold and black or white and gold. It looked expensive enough to get away with bad behavior. But the paint was the distraction. The Hemi was the file. A 341 cubic inch Hemi V8 gave the Adventurer up to 320 horsepower. That turns the whole car from jewelry on wheels into a real Chrysler family speed weapon. Not quiet, not subtle. A bright, polished DeSoto with combustion pressure hiding behind the grin. Top speed reached up to 135 miles per hour. At that pace, glamour stops being harmless. The long body has to punch a hole through the air. The chrome-heavy shape becomes mass the engine must drag forward, and the Hemi keeps shoving like it has a grudge against restraint. This is where the Adventurer gets dangerous. It looks like wealth first and machinery second, but the throttle reverses the order instantly. Speed did not belong to only one Chrysler badge. DeSoto had its own polished weapon, and at 135 miles per hour, Mistaking it for decoration was a very expensive error. The 1957 Dodge D500 did not need country club manners. It had hardware. The D500 package was not a shiny badge slapped onto the fender to help a salesman survive a slow Tuesday. It was a real performance setup built around a high-performance Ram V8, making over 285 horsepower, with stronger tuned versions noted in the file. This Dodge carried the forward look shape, but the mood was different. Less polished aristocrat, more clenched fist. It felt practical, aggressive, and willing to get dirty, the kind of car that looked like it knew what a racetrack was and had already decided normal streets were too easy. Top speed ran between 130 and 135 miles per hour. At that pace, a big Dodge is not floating through a postcard. The nose loads up. Weight transfer starts throwing its elbows. The frame and suspension take the pounding every time the driver backs off, turns in, or digs back into the throttle. This is heavy steel being forced to move like it is lighter than it really is, and every part underneath knows the difference. The D500 told America something simple. Durable did not have to mean slow. Dodge could build a car sensible enough for the street, then give it enough power to make that sensible reputation look suspicious. If the DeSoto was a gold watch with a Hemi pulse, the D500 was a clenched fist with a VIN stamped on it. The 1958 Plymouth Fury Golden Commando dragged speed out of the rich man's garage and closer to the street. That is why it feels dangerous. Its 350 cubic inch Golden Commando V8 made 305 horsepower. Not the biggest number in the Chrysler family, not the loudest brag. But in a more accessible Plymouth shell, that power changed the whole attitude of the car. The Fury wore the forward look with a long, low body and sharp tail fins, but it did not feel formal like some of its older relatives. It felt younger, meaner, closer to the diner parking lot than the executive driveway. Top speed reached 135 to 140 miles per hour. At that speed, the fins stop being harmless drama. Air stacks up against the front, the long body starts feeling its own size, and sidewall flex becomes part of the drive. The tail no longer feels nailed down. It wants to wander, and the driver has to keep both hands working because old Plymouth steel at 140 miles per hour does not care how pretty the brochure looked. People remember the Fury through Christine, and that shadow helps. But the car does not need Hollywood to feel unsettling. A 305 horsepower Plymouth running up to 140 miles per hour already sounds like something that should make insurance agents sweat through their shirts. This was mass market speed, learning how to bare its teeth. The 1959 Pontiac Catalina Tri-Power stood differently before it ever moved. Pontiac pushed the wheels farther apart and created the wide track stance that made the car look lower, wider, and more planted. That was not empty styling theater. The file credits it with better road holding, and at the speeds this car could reach, that mattered. The engine matched the posture, a 389 cubic inch V8 breathing through tri-power, using 3 two-barrel carburetors, with output ranging from 315 to 345 horsepower, depending on the version. Top speed landed between 135 and 140 miles per hour. Horsepower can shove a car forward, but track width helps decide whether the driver believes the car is still on his side. That wide stance gave the Catalina a planted attitude before the engine even started arguing. The car looked settled. The engine had enough strength to make that look honest, and the road did not care about chrome. It cared about grip, weight, and whether the car could keep its feet under it. This was not Pontiac borrowing speed for one flashy moment. It was Pontiac building speed into the way the car stood. The Catalina became a launch pad for stronger Bonnevilles and eventually the GTO, but the message was already loud enough. Pontiac had stopped flirting with speed. It had started speaking it fluently, 145 miles per hour. Start there. Not with the fins, not with the grille, not with the luxury. The number is the reason the 1957 Chrysler 300C sits on the throne. This was a large American Grand Tourer from the late 1950s with a long, low, wide body, sharp tail fins, and a powerful trapezoidal grille that looked less like decoration and more like a warning sign made out of chrome. It was massive, imposing, and far too confident to pretend it was small. The engine was the hammer. A 392 cubic inch Hemi V8, up to 375 horsepower. Hemispherical combustion chambers feeding the kind of big displacement logic America understood better than almost anyone. More air, more fuel, more shove, and let the straightaway file the complaint. At 145 miles per hour, the 300C does not feel like a nimble toy. It feels like a chrome warship charging through interstate air. The steering loads up, the braking distance gets ugly, and bleeding off that much speed from that much Chrysler becomes a serious mechanical demand. The body is not slipping through the wind. It is forcing the wind to move. This was not built for delicate corner carving. It was built for long, hard highway dominance. A Grand Tourer in the most American sense, huge, powerful, imposing, and convinced that refinement should come with enough horsepower to frighten smaller machines into silence. The Chrysler 300C did not need to shout. The Hemi did that. Chrome made it visible. 375 horsepower made it dangerous. 145 miles per hour made it final. Be honest. If your modern daily driver had to line up beside one of these chrome-fed animals at 130 miles per hour, would it survive the pull, or would it start flashing warning lights and begging for a software update? Pick your poison. Corvette fiberglass nerve, Thunderbird boost, Catalina wide-track confidence, or the 300C sitting on the Hemi throne. Subscribe to Mechanics Vault and open the next sealed file.